This crime remained unsolved for 3 decades. After many years, justice has prevailed. The criminals were caught and punished, and there is little information and photos about this case. But the case is quite interesting. Let's take it in order. Joseph Tacone was born on January 7, 1925 in Brooklyn. He was the first child in a Catholic Italian-American family. In the early 1940s, he met and married his wife Rose. They had 7 children. Tacone participated in World War II and the Korean War. After that, he moved to Seattle. There, he started running his own meat business, Alaska Meat Provisions. Many years passed and Joseph divorced his wife. 1976 changed the course of his life. Tacone started dating and then fell deeply in love with Renee Curtis. She was a 24-year-old secretary who worked for his company. Tacone lavished her with gifts and flowers. In mid-1978, Curtis broke off the relationship and moved to live with her mother. It was the end of September 1978. Curtis called Tacone into the house under. She said her washing machine broke down. On this day, Joseph Tacone disappeared without a trace. The Curtis house was demolished. In its place, they decided to build a shopping center. In June 2007, the excavator started working. They began to dig out a plot for new construction. But he was discovered by something that was not expected. It was human and remains in a bag. Prophet Police Patrol. Police officers called the investigation team. Investigators and criminologists have started to work. Law enforcement agencies conducted a DNA analysis. The test confirmed it was the remains of Tacone. A detective took up the case. But let's go back a few decades. In 1990, Jacqueline Gypsy Tacone began her own investigation. She conducted a survey of police officers. Then she hired a private detective and also personally contacted representatives of the enterprises with which her father worked. But the business partners claimed that they had not seen the man since the summer of '78. It should be noted that for some time the daughter suspected Renee Curtis of involvement in the disappearance of her father. She decided to visit Renee and talk to her again in person. But Curtis has long since changed her place of residence. Unfortunately, Joseph's daughter was unable to find out Renee's new address. Gypsy, along with his brother Dean, developed a plan. They wanted to expose Renee. The plan was, to put it mildly, crude. The brother and sister had no experience in such matters, but still decided to implement it. Dean called Renee. He introduced himself as an insurance agent. He informed the woman that Joseph had insured his life for a large sum. The recipients of insurance in the policy were 2 people, Renee's ex-girlfriend and son, Dean Tacone. A day later, Dean called Renee again. This time, the young man introduced himself as Dean Tacone. He said that an insurance agent called him and informed him about the policy. Dean tried every way to get Renee to talk. I wanted to get as much information out of her as possible. But Renee Curtis was not so easy to fool. Apparently, the woman sensed a trick and stopped the conversation. Indeed, the idea was strange. Why did the insurance agent start looking for insurance recipients only 12 years after the occurrence of the insured event? The brother and sister made a recording of the phone conversation and handed it over to the investigators. That was the end of it. There were no more records in the missing person case. Gypsy got married and had 4 children. Detective Benson also managed to get information. So, in the late 70s, the house at 10324 Canyon Road was rented to different tenants. From 78 to 79, the house was rented by Geraldine Hees, Renee's mother. Thus, Renee, after leaving Anchorage, moved to Puyallup to her mother. Accordingly, Renee's last meeting with the murdered man could have taken place in the house at the already known address. Besides, Joseph was seen near the house by neighbors. Ben Benson found out that Geraldine Hees died a few years ago. She spent the last years of her life in Seattle. Her daughter Renee was with her. It was established that Geraldine was raising an adopted son. Nicholas had a criminal past in the late 70s. Early 80s, he was serving a sentence in prison for murder. On September 22, 1978, Nicholas Natara was returning to his home in Hill. After a short-term hospitalization, his wife was the only passenger at the wheel of her car. On the way, Vicky Natara informed her husband that she was planning to leave him. A skirmish began between the spouses. Nicholas pulled off the highway into an isolated gravel pit north of Nenana. He shot his wife. and he hid the body of his murdered wife in the bushes. After 3 weeks, Vika's corpse was discovered by local residents. During the interrogation, Natara began to deny involvement in the murder, but under the pressure of evidence, he had to confess. Natara was charged with first-degree murder. He was facing 15 years in prison, but the court handed down a milder sentence: 15 years of imprisonment with the right to parole after 8 years. The court took into account that the accused had no previous criminal record. He was characterized on the positive side. Benson suggested that if a man killed his wife so easily, he could just as easily deal with his sister's lover. His suspicions about Natara intensified when he found an air ticket in the materials of the criminal case. The ticket was dated August. Natara flew to his mother and sister in Washington State, visited them at an already known address, so he could have killed Joseph. Nicholas was at large. His probation period was coming to an end. Detective Benson called Nick in for questioning. Natara thought that the conversation would be about the murder of his wife, so he was not worried. Benson asked Nick about where and by whom he worked in Alaska. Nicholas replied that he worked for a meat company. He said that the company was headed by a certain Joe. He does not remember his last name. Natara added that Joe was of Italian descent. Now Benson was asking questions about Joseph. How long had Nick been working for him? What was their relationship like? The detective noticed a strange behavior. At every mention of the name of the murdered man, Nicholas involuntarily moved back. It was as if old memories were scaring him. The detective decided to reveal his cards. He told Nick that the remains of Joseph Tacone had been found on the site of the house where his mother lived. Nicholas almost immediately began to give confessions. He stated that he was indirectly involved in the murder of Joseph. At the end of August 1978, he was staying at his mother's house. His sister lived with Geraldine. Joseph came. He begged Renee to marry him. Renee sent him away. Joseph made a scandal. Geraldine decided to protect her daughter, took a gun out of the closet and shot Joseph. Then they thought for a long time how to get rid of the corpse. They didn't find anything better than dismembering the body and burying it. The criminals first put the body in the refrigerator, and when it finally stiffened, they sawed it into pieces with a chainsaw. Benson doubted the sincerity of the words of the interrogated. Nicholas tried to shift the main blame to his dead mother. Nick's sister, according to his testimony, was only a witness to the crime. Benson continued to press the interrogator. In the end, Nicholas confessed that he was the one who shot Joseph. He committed the crime alone. The mother knew nothing about the murder, and his sister, as it turned out, was on vacation in Hawaii at that moment. He continued to deny his sister's involvement in the crime. Let me remind you, a month later he shot his wife in the same way. Benson drew attention to the episode with the shot. There was no bullet wound on the skull of the victim. Nick was clearly lying. Then Nick said the phrase, "We went to the store to get a chainsaw." 5 minutes before that, he claimed that he had committed the crime alone. Nick was arrested, but Detective Benson suspected that his sister was also involved in the murder. Nick had no motive to kill Joseph. On March 24, 2008, Detective Benson invited Renee Curtis to the police station for questioning. The woman was not explained the reason why she was summoned for questioning. At the beginning of the interrogation, she kept quite calm. As soon as Benson mentioned the name of Tacone, Renee's whole face changed. Curtis stated that she and Tacone first met in Alaska, that they were lovers. The relationship between them lasted about a year. Tacone often gave her and her mother gifts and regularly made her an offer to become his wife. She declined the marriage proposal, eventually ended the relationship and moved to Washington. In other words, she ran away from her lover. Benson reported that they had found the remains of Joseph, whose murder her brother confessed to. Next, the detective went to the trick. He said that despite the confession, Nicholas Natara would not be prosecuted since the statute of limitations had expired since the murder. Therefore, Renee can calmly tell the whole truth without fear for her future fate. Renee believed it and started talking, to tell the whole truth about those events. The detective read Curtis's rights again and offered to record the testimony on a dictaphone. Curtis confessed to providing criminal assistance to Nicholas Natara. She didn't take part in the murder. However, she helped get rid of the corpse. Nicholas informed her that he had killed her ex-lover. The next day, Curtis arrived at her mother's house. They went down to the basement and made sure that Joseph was dead. Natara asked his sister to take him to the store for a chainsaw. Renee helped her brother dismember the body. Then they buried the remains in the backyard of the house. She personally threw the gun into Lake Washington. Renee stated that Natara often complained about the constant harassment of the Tacone. She even told her brother that she would like Tacone to leave forever, but she did not want her former lover to die. Natara committed the murder on his own initiative. The detective repeatedly asked Curtis if she was in the house on Canyon Road at the time of the murder. Each time Renee answered she was not at home at the time of the murder. On March 25, 2009, the trial began. In April 2009, Curtis and Natara were found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The court concluded that the organizer of the crime was Renee Curtis. It was she who persuaded her brother to kill Joseph. The court found that the motive of the crime was Renee's desire to get rid of an annoying lover. That's all for today. I thank you for your attention and recommend subscribing to the channel and also clicking on the bell so as not to miss new videos that come out daily.